evening. It's good to be here with you. You may be wondering what I'm doing up here already. I decided to change things up a little bit this evening. We're going to start with the message, and then we're going to move into a time of song, and then into a time of prayer. And part of that has to do with the topic of tonight's message. I want to take you on a journey. Over the past several weeks, we've been talking about creation compared to other views of creation. But this evening, I wanted to talk about the beauty of creation. And before we start going verse by verse through the first two chapters, I wanted to show you a little bit about creation, give you a picture of creation and some of the marvelous things in it, so that as we're going through it, we can see the power of God, and we can remember some of these things that we'll talk through this evening. So I am going to dim down the lights a little bit so you can see the screen better, because we're going to be very much focused on the pictures. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And in Genesis 1:3, it says, God said, "Let there be light." Have you ever stopped to consider light? What exactly light is? I just said I'm going to dim the lights so that you can see the screen a little bit better. But when you think about light is this white ray that splits off and breaks into all these colors. And in essence, when God creates light, He's creating everything that we see. He's creating us being able to see. He's creating color. The fact that I can stand up here and you can tell me what color shirt I'm wearing. I can look at the pews and tell you that the pews are green. You can look at flowers of the field. And it's interesting that how everything that we'll look at tonight, all is based off of the premise that everything that we see is based off of being able to see from light. And everything that we see is based off of color that we see. And as we see the earth, when it was first formed, God formed it as a wasteland, that it was formless and void, and there was darkness over the face of the deep. Speaking of the waters being over the earth, that there was no land, and so the earth was a wasteland because of water. And have you ever stopped to consider water and how powerful it is? When we talk about water, there's a certain sense of beauty to it, but there's also a certain sense of destruction. Perfect example of this is Genesis 6, where God decides that He's going to flood the entire world, and God destroys the world with water. With modern technology, we've developed ways to use water to cut through inches of steel. And I think that you can pressurize water to such a degree that you can cut through an inch of steel almost instantly. It's amazing. There's a highly destructive aspect of water. Hurricanes, tsunamis, floods. And yet, water is something that is needed for our survival. It's also something that there's a lot of beauty in. You look at pictures like this of the waves crashing on the shore. You have a picture like this with the mountains reflecting in the still water. This is a very popular place for photographers to go and take a picture of this exact spot, because of the clear water and the mountains reflecting on it. There's a lot of beauty within water. And it reminds me of God questioning Job. Now, Job was going through this suffering. God had allowed Satan to persecute Job, and Job was going through this great suffering. And as we read through the book of Job, you see that Job questions God. Why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? What is the reason for all this suffering? And God decides that He's going to answer Job. In Job 38 and verse 1, it says, "And the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, 'Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me.'" And God, in essence, is using war imagery. Literally, He says, "Gird up your loins." And in that culture, when you would go off to war, you would tie up your clothing around your legs so that you could move and you could fight better. And God is telling Job to prepare himself, because God is going to question him and it's not going to be pretty. And one of the things that God asked Job comes in Job 38 in verses 8 and 9. It says, "Or who shut up the sea with the doors, when it burst out from the womb, when I made the clouds its garments and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, Thus far shall you come and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed." I find this verse amazing. I have a picture here of very violent and beautiful waves crashing, and God says, "You're not going any further than this." And the waves obey. The waves obey. The natural order in nature itself obeys what God has prescribed, and God says the waves will not go further than this without my command, and they obey. Think also of the water depths, the deep. We have many people who are fascinated by seeing how deep we can go, and yet we still to this day have not searched out the deepest parts of the oceans. And in Job 38 and verse 16, God questions Job again. He says, "Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked into the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare if you know all this." Now I find these questions to Job very humbling. Job didn't understand his suffering, and so in his arrogance, he challenged God. And God questions him and tells him to dress for action like a man as he questions him. And God uses the created order in nature to tell Job that you don't really know. You don't really understand. We're dealing with a God that is so powerful that he created everything in 6 days. And God is so powerful that he didn't even need to use 6 days. If you read the commentaries from the 2nd century through the 16th century, you'll see that one of the questions that is prevalent among many of these commentaries is, well, why did God take so long to create the world? With God being such a powerful God. And God does that to pattern rest for us. But Genesis 1 presents God as Elohim, creator God, and Genesis 2 presents God as Yahweh, a relational God. And as we see God appear to Job, God is, in essence, pursuing his relationship with Job and questioning him, "I am the creator of all. What do you know about the things that I have created? And so how can you question me and what I have done?" Think also of storms and the water in the air. God questions Job about this as well. He says, "Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war?" Later on, he says, "Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightning, that they may go and say, Here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding to the mind? Who can number the clouds by wisdom, or who can tilt the waterskins of the heavens, when dust runs into a mass, and the clouds stick fast together?" And God questioning Job, do you have the power to summon a storm? And to say, flood this area or flood that area, rain on this? And God in his power says, I can. I can. Out of the water, God formed the dry land, and we see much beauty in this as well. Pictures of mountain, a stream flowing from that. You have El Cap in Yosemite National Park, a famous place for people to go. You have jungles. I love this picture. These hills that are green. Again, a forest on a lake, overlooking a forest and a lake. You have plants, grass of a green field, lavender. What about the mountains? These tall, massive rocks. And are we able to say to the mountain, lift up and go here? You know, Jesus says if we have faith the size of a mustard seed, we can do that. God is the one who formed these. It's beautiful imagery in this landscape that God formed very carefully. Reminds me of what God questioned Job when he said, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who has stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? And God created the mountains, and God questions Job, and he says, where were you when I laid these foundations? We can get into some of the nature as well, the beauty of flowers. And God says that he clothes the grass and the flowers of the field, and yet he describes them as just a breath that fades away. The word of the Lord endures forever. In the water, God filled the water with fish. There's a lot of beautiful fish that we see in the sea. A lot of color. When we talked about how light brings forth color, we see a lot of this color in fish. Orange, green, red. You see turtles majestically swimming through water, and they can't really walk on land at all. I don't know if you've ever seen a turtle or a video of a turtle walking on land and how slow they are, but then when they get into the sea, they just seem to be majestic. A lot of different beautiful varieties of fish. I want to briefly talk about this one, the octopus. The octopus isn't one that we often think of as being a very beautiful creature, but it is a very fascinating creature. Did you know that an octopus can smell and taste and even think through all 8 of their arms? An octopus can fit through a space that is bigger than that's just bigger than its eye. It's got no vertebrae, which allows it to squeeze and move through any of those spaces, and it uses this to hide. It will often create hiding places among shells and even broken glass jars by squeezing into them. An octopus can change its color and skin and appearance to make itself look like a spiky rock. It has this camouflaging ability that as it's passing through stuff, it'll change its appearance, not just in color, but it has the ability to form its skin into different shapes to make it appear like it's a rock so that its prey cannot find it. And what's fascinating is that it does this almost instantly. Their brain processes this and implements it faster than you can blink. That's amazing. Who told the octopus to do this? Who studied the octopus and trained it? Here's how you avoid your prey. Here's how you camouflage. Here's how you do that this fast. Who told the octopus how they could do that? Was it Job? Was it us? Well, see, I find even more amazing is they believe octopus are colorblind, and yet it can mimic color that it can't even see. Now, how does that work? Their skin is so complex in how it perceives that if you cut off one of their tentacles, even an hour after, it'll still be mimicking that camouflage. And this has to do with the fact that they are extremely intelligent of the animal creatures. They estimate that there are 500 million neurons in their brain. And to compare that to humans, they estimate have about 100 billion. So, there's a long distance between that. But how about other water animals? Some fish and snails, they have 20,000. Compared to 500 million, there's a big difference there. Cats, they say cats have 250 million neurons. An octopus has double that. And intelligent dog breeds, they say, have about the same, that 500 million. And a third of these neurons are in their brains, but the other 2/3 are in their tentacles, which allows them to operate each tentacle independently, but also work together in harmony. Who trained the octopus to do that? Their intelligence goes beyond just camouflaging. They can do puzzles and problem solving. And scientists have done tests with them to see how they do with memory and solving puzzles. They're also known for being escape artists, and this helps with their having a short-term and a long-term memory to memorize these things and be able to implement those to escape even the most impossible situations. Did you know octopuses can recognize people? They can tell who people are, and even if all those people are wearing the same outfit, they can distinguish between people, and even when that person changes their outfit, they know who they like, they recognize them, and they'll often go to them. They also plan and think ahead. When they travel to a new location and they don't know if there's a shelter there, they'll take objects like 2 coconut halves and they'll carry them on the long journey. And then when they get tired, they rest and they hide inside them. Now, who told the octopus to go through all this work to carry these objects for miles and miles and miles as they walk along the sea floor for protection? Now, who trained them to do this? As well with that, they are very exploratory and playful, and some scientists will say that they are equivalent to about a 5-year-old in curiosity and maybe even in intelligence. These aren't the only animals that we see in nature. We see many. You see different lizards. Love this picture, the nice bulging eyes. We have dogs. We talked about dogs being of a similar intelligence. You have cats, which are of a lesser intelligence scientifically. I'm sorry to you, cat people. You have giraffes. Giraffes are known for being very playful. They'll stick their tongues out at you and mess around with you. What about the lion? A ferocious animal. God questions Job about this. He says, "Can you hunt the prey for the lion or satisfy the appetite of young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their thickets?" Perhaps you prefer tiger. Very similar. One of my favorite creatures is the fox. Very beautiful, especially in the time of snow. God also created the birds. And didn't Jesus say, "Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns. Your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they?" And Jesus, speaking of birds and how they naturally store up food that God has provided for them, who trained them to do that? You see a lot of color and majesty among birds. Parrots, they can mimic speech. We all know about that. What about the ostrich? Not the most beautiful or graceful bird. And yet God questions Job about this, and he asks him, basically stating, "Do you know why I made the ostrich so stupid?" Tell me if you know this. How about the eagle? The eagle is known, especially in the place down south of us, as being very majestic and a noble bird. Did you know eagles can see 8 times farther than humans? They can focus on something that is 2 miles away. They can see a mouse or a rabbit running through the grass from 2 miles away, hone in on it, and go in for their prey. Now, who designed the eagle to be like this? What about the crow? Let's take a minute to talk about the crow. Again, not the most appealing bird, but the crow is an extraordinary animal. All the birds in this family, known as the corvids, crows, ravens, magpies, and jays, they're all very extremely intelligent birds. They're family-oriented. They're usually monogamous, which means mate for life. They'll often hold funerals for dead birds. When one of them dies, they'll all gather around it, and you'll hear them squawk and squabble and cry out their songs. They are songbirds, but I don't think any of us would like to hear them sing. But they have these funerals, and then often with those as well, they'll investigate what killed the crow, and if they find a predator nearby, the whole herd of them, if you will go and chase off the predator. They'll also make dramatic scenes when a predator is around to alert the other birds, and they're fearless because they'll often try and attack it and scare it away. They're very intelligent. Some scientists would say that they may be comparable in memory to a 7-year-old. They are the only bird that we know of the only series of birds that we know of that makes tools to get food. A bird will grab an item like a stick or something, and they will dig out food that's inside of a jar or inside of a log. They're the only birds that we know of that use items to find their food, and they're intelligent in this. And scientists have done research on this, and they've captured some birds, put them in these big cages, and then one experiment was they put a basket in a glass cylinder that was full of food. And the only item that they gave the bird was a piece of wire. And the bird picks up the wire and tries to fish out the basket and dig it out, and it's not working. So what does it do? It wraps it halfway around the cylinder to make a hook, drops it in there, scoops it up, and pulls the basket out. You can find a video for that on YouTube. Who taught the bird how to do this? I mean, that's amazing. As well, you see these birds will drop nuts and other objects in front of cars so that the cars will run them over so that they can get the food inside. These birds are smart enough that they can figure out puzzles. There's another video on YouTube of a crow going through a 10-step puzzle in order to get his food, and you had to do each puzzle in the right order in order to unlock all the pieces to unlock the last one. Who taught the bird how to do this? Perhaps they were designed this way by God. They too can recognize people. They'll remember the good ones that are friendly to them, and they'll often be friendly back to them. They remember them so much so that they'll even remember their cars. And if the people are especially nice to the crows will occasionally give them gifts. They'll also remember the mean ones and will annoy or attack them. There's a man that they knew and who was friendly with them, and they were peaceful to him. The guy walked through the door, put on a mask, came out, and the birds started squawking like crazy because they didn't recognize the man with the mask on because they couldn't recognize his facial features. Based off of that, the scientists at a university decided to do a study over, I think it's 13 years now, on crows. And they had a particular mask that they bought, and they went out and they caught a crow in front of all the other crows. And they wanted to see, well, what is the response? Well, all the other crows had this negative response. And so every time that somebody would come out with the mask, they would come around, they would squawk, and they'd dive at him, trying to scare him away because he's a predator. Even up to 10 years later, they recognized the same mask. So much so that when they would use the mask and they'd wear a hat or have something partially covering the face, or even wore the mask upside down, the birds still recognized them. That's amazing. What's even more amazing is the knowledge spread to the younger birds who didn't exist for this initial crisis, and yet as many of the older generation died off and the new generation came in, they still had that instinct that the man in the mask was a bad person because of the crows' communication with each other. There's a story of magpies. A woman had them in her backyard and she liked to feed them, and so that they would come to her so that they could get food. Later on, they would start tapping on her window when she would walk by. She liked this, so then she gave them some more food. Then one day, her doorbell rang. She opened the door, nobody was there. And then she closed it and it rang again, and she found out that the magpies were ringing her doorbell so that they would give her food. I mean, it's amazing. But what's more interesting is her husband, they didn't like him at all. One day, he decided to pretend to throw something at them, and this got them in a frenzy, so every morning, they would poop on his windshield. But get this, it was only on the driver's side. So later on, they decide, okay, well, let's switch. The wife would drive him to work, and he'd sit in the passenger side. When they started doing that, the birds switched and started pooping on the passenger side. These birds also have a very complex language in how they communicate with each other. We mentioned parrots, how parrots can mimic speech, but did you know that crows can be trained to speak and mimic English, German, Russian, and French? There's been numerous reports of different stories that crows have messed with dogs by calling out, here boy, let's go boy, come on boy. So much so that one crow led a group of dogs around a university campus by doing so, witnessed by hundreds of students. They've also scientifically proven that these birds dream. They've connected things to their brain to watch their brain activity, and when they sleep, this brain activity is going on, and it's the exact same brain activity that goes on when they sing their horrible songs. They are birds that love to have fun. If you look into them, they like to mess with other animals to annoy them and mess with them. You'll see them chasing off eagles and other larger birds, and just seems like they're having a fun time. They're very curious birds. God questions Job about these birds when he says, who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God for help and wander about for lack of food? And Jesus says it's God who feeds them. And through their instincts, they store up this food for themselves. God's question to Job, do you know how these were made, how they were formed, who gave them this intelligence? Job obviously did not. Everything that we have talked about so far all takes place on this small little blue planet. This is home for us. This is where we live. Everything that we really know, that we've experienced, is on here on this planet, but there's so much more to this world than just the planet. In Genesis 1, it talks about God making two great lights, a great one to rule the day, it's the sun, lesser one to rule the night, the moon. And they govern and they light up the earth so that we can live, so we can have day and night according to the created order that God created even before He created the sun to rule over the day and the moon to rule over the night. It reminds me again of the passage we read earlier when God initially questions Job. The first question that God asked Job, He says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who has determined its measurement? Surely you know, or who has stretched the line upon it?" God asked Job, do you know how big the earth is? This place where you dwell, all that you know, everything that you possess that you had lost, everything that's on that, do you know how big the earth is? Well, with modern science and telescopes and satellites and that, we've determined how big the earth is. It's 1,300 kilometers in diameter. It's every direction as it's a sphere. What about the sun, though? The sun is 1.4 million kilometers. Now, you can see in the picture there's the sun, and I don't know if you can see the very small blue dot that's a little behind Saturn there. This is in size order, not space order. That small blue dot is not Earth. Earth is so small at this point that you can't even see it on that picture. That small blue dot that you may see is Uranus. And I was first learned about this from Louie Giglio's video, How Great Is Our God, and I'll be basing this off of what he talked. He used a golf ball, but I'm going to use a tennis ball because that's all I have. A picture that the earth is the size of a tennis ball. And this tennis ball, the earth, is 13,000 kilometers in diameter. The sun is 1.4 million kilometers. That, in essence, means that if the earth were the size of a tennis ball, the sun would be 23 feet. That is roughly that post to 3/4 of the way through the piano compared to this. And remember, that's not just one line, that's a sphere, that's every direction compared to the earth. The sun is so large that you could fit over 1 million Earths inside of it. But as you may see there in the picture, there's this white light that's a little bit after that is known as Sirius. There are more stars. God didn't just create the sun and the moon as lights, but we see all the stars. We don't even see them all, but we see many stars in space. The brightest star in our sky is Sirius, and it is about 20 times brighter than our sun. And Sirius is even larger than our sun. It is 2.5 million kilometers. Where the sun was 1.3, Sirius is 2.5. Again, taking the measurements, if the earth were a tennis ball, Sirius would be from the stage to the door. It's massive. And when we're speaking about distance, though it's not double the diameter of the sun, it has far more volume than the sun, because when you start getting bigger in volume, you start getting much, much bigger, much quicker. And so whereas you could fit over 1 million Earths in the sun, you could fit 7.1 million Earths in Sirius. It seems like a lot, doesn't it? But then again, you may see another star in our corner. We're just going to skip over that one. We're going to go to Arcturus. And that first small one is the one that we skipped. That's Vega. The smaller one below that's Sirius. And then that small, tiny dot that's orange is our sun. And you can't even see any of Earth's planets. You you probably couldn't make a dot on that screen to represent the size of the Earth compared to this planet, which is 36 million kilometers in diameter. It is 26 times bigger than the sun. It is 2,700 times longer than the Earth. So you would have to take the Earth and line up 2,700 of them to get the diameter of this star. Again, if the Earth were a tennis ball, Arcturus would be 181 meters, which is almost 2 football fields. Now, I've played soccer on a full-size 130-meter field, and I've put a tennis ball on one side and walked to the other side and looked, and you can't even see it, even an orange one. Add another 50 meters to that. And it's that in every direction compared to this. That's massive. You could fit 21.2 billion Earths inside this star. That's a lot. We went from 7.1 million to 21.2 billion. But we continue. You can see again another corner, and that is Rigel. Rigel is 97 million kilometers, and at this point, our sun is becoming such a small dot that you can barely even see it. Rigel is, if you were to line up Earth all in a row, it would take 7,500 Earths to make the diameter of Rigel. And if the Earth were a tennis ball, again, it'd be 488 meters. That is, in essence, the Empire State Building to the tip, plus 40 meters on top of that. Or if you prefer, it's the Hoover Dam, plus the Hoover Dam, plus 40 meters on top of that. You take out your tennis ball and you go and compare it to that. It's nothing. It's nothing. They estimate that 415 billion Earths could fit inside this. You think we've gone large enough? You may notice that there is no other star in the corner there. That's for a good reason, because we're going to take a very large jump. The next one is Betelgeuse, or Betelgeuse. That is massive. 1.3 billion kilometers. And Rigel is just a spot compared to it. That orange star there is not our sun, but Arcturus, which is 26 times bigger than our sun. 1.3 billion kilometers. From Earth to Saturn is 1.5 billion kilometers, which means you could put Betelgeuse between the Earth and the sun and have 100 million kilometers on each side. That's how big it is. It is 9 times the distance from the Earth to the sun. And again, you would have to line up 100,000 Earths, the size of a tennis ball, or 100,000 Earths to make the diameter of Betelgeuse. And if the Earth were a tennis ball, that's 6.54 kilometers. And that's not even the biggest. Again, that's 2.6 trillion Earths can fit inside Betelgeuse. The next one is Mu Cephei, which is 1.9 billion kilometers. That's 134,000 Earths lined up in a row to make that length. It's 8.8 kilometers with the Earth the size of a tennis ball. That is, in Regina terms, that is Costco to city center. Or if you'd rather, that's your tennis ball compared to the height of Mount Everest. You couldn't fit this star between Earth and Saturn. It's that big. And they estimate that you could fit 2.7 quadrillion Earths inside this star. Now, we're getting into numbers. I mean, we've already hit numbers beyond what we can actually comprehend. Scientists have done studies on this to see, what's the actual highest number that humans can comprehend, and really, we can't comprehend that very, very high at all. So to give you a picture of this, I got this again from Louie Giglio from his video. 1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 million seconds. So in 12 days, you can give me a call and you can say, Aiden, it's been 1 million seconds since we heard you talk about this 1 million seconds being 12 days. What do you think a billion seconds is? Any guesses? A lot more. A million seconds is 12 days. A billion seconds, I know in my mind I was thinking, well, maybe a year. A billion seconds is 31.5 years. You can see how by going on 1,000 millions is 1 billion. You can see by going up that 1,000, you start to grow astronomically. You go from 12 days to 31 and a half years. Well, what about a trillion? Yeah, if a billion was 31 years. What's a trillion? 1,000 years? 2,000 years? A trillion seconds is 31.7 thousand years. Did you know the Earth hasn't even existed for a trillion seconds? In fact, you would have to times the length of the existence of our universe by 6 in order to get a trillion seconds. You go from 12 days to 31 and a half years to 31,710 years, and we haven't even hit a quadrillion yet. A quadrillion seconds is 31.7 million years. When we start to go up these different tiers, we start to go up astronomically. 1 million Earths can fit into the sun. And yet we have 2.7 quadrillion Earths can fit into Musifi. That is in essence comparing 12 days to 100 million years. That is the size difference between them. And we haven't even hit the biggest. The next one, up until I believe it's 3 years ago, this was the biggest star we found. This is VY Canis Majoris. It's a pretty fitting name for its size, 2 billion kilometers. There's 153,000 Earths lined up in a row to make its diameter. Or if the Earth was the size of a tennis ball, that's 10 kilometers long. And they estimate there are 7 quadrillion Earths that could fit inside it. But the biggest one that we have found to date is UY Scuti, which is 2.4 billion kilometers. This is massive. From Earth to Uranus is 2.8 billion kilometers. So you take away 400 million kilometers, and that's how big this star is. You could not make a dot on this screen that would represent the size of our sun. It is that big. And this is the biggest star that we've found, and I don't know about you, but after looking at these, you begin to feel very small and almost a little bit insignificant in light of the vastness of the universe. Is sort of the natural humbling that comes from looking at this. But that's not even the biggest, is it? There's probably bigger stars that we found out, but have you ever considered that when we're talking about how big these stars are, that you have to account for all the space in between these stars? You look up in the stars and you see billions and billions of stars in the sky, and most of them are a little bit smaller than our sun. Some of them bigger, but our sun is a little bit bigger than average. But all the space in between that is massive. It's also beautiful. Kind of begs the question, why did God create the universe so vast? We have what's known as the known universe, and we still haven't reached the depths of it. And David writes in Psalm 19, he says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuits to the end of them. There is nothing hidden from its heat." And the sun's heat, there's nothing on earth that isn't affected by it. You go further from Earth and you get colder than our coldest place has ever been here. And David, when describing the universe, he says, all of this, all the stars in the heavens, everything that we witness and behold, the billions of stars that are out there, what are they for? To sing praises to God, to declare His majesty. There are hundreds of billions of stars in this galaxy, which may look familiar as it's home for us. We are a small little solar system in the big cluster of this galaxy. And we talked about the biggest star that we had looked at, and that biggest star being 2.4 billion kilometers. How about this? The Milky Way is 104,000 light years. You want to know how big that is? You take 104,000 and you times that by 9.46 trillion kilometers. That's how long the Milky Way is. And this is just one of thousands and hundreds of thousands or millions of galaxies, each with billions of stars. There's a very famous picture that came out in the 90s. Does anybody recognize this picture? Doesn't seem like a whole lot, does it? Seems kind of underwhelming. This picture is known as the pale blue dot. I don't know if you can see a very small dot in the one ray of light there. It's right there. That's the Earth. When, I believe it was the Voyager, they sent out to get pictures as it was drifting out, and the plan was never to return it home, but just have it drift off until they couldn't get any pictures back. Between Neptune and Pluto, 3.7 billion miles away from the Earth, it turned back to position towards the Earth, and it took this picture, and it caught the Earth between a ray of light from the sun. The sun, after all that distance, still was shining enough to put a glare on the lens of the camera 3.7 billion miles away. And when David says that there is nothing hidden from its heat, I don't know if he really understood what he was saying with that. That's a very pale blue dot, and somewhere on that very pale small blue dot is us standing here tonight, which is in our Milky Way galaxy. And did you know that you could not put a dot on this screen that would account for the size of our solar system? That is how big the Milky Way is. But again, it's only one of many galaxies. And they're beautiful. And for thousands of years, only recently have we been able to see there are other galaxies. There's many different ones. You have a large one at the top there, and its tail sort of drifting off towards a smaller one further off in the distance. You have a different sort of galaxies. These aren't the only things that we see out in space. I don't know if this picture is familiar to anybody. I've used this as the series cover for this series. This is a supernova. It's a star that exploded, and this is what it created. I mean, it's beautiful. You have other ones like this. I believe this is also the one that they pointed a radio type thing at it, and they could hear a frequency vibrating back from it as well. There's a lot of beautiful things up in the sky that for thousands and thousands of years, no one even knew they existed. God commanded Abraham and said, "Go outside and count the stars if you're able to." That's how many your descendants are going to be. And for thousands of years, people thought there's no way we could count the stars. There's no way we can do it. Modern science came out, and for a brief period of time, we thought we can count the stars. And then once we realized that there are over 500 billion of them in our own galaxy, and there's galaxies upon galaxies, we now realize there's no way that we can count the stars. This is another very famous picture. This is known as the Eagle Nebula. I love this picture. Quite beautiful. As well as this. They say that God is He's always watching you. And as the joke goes, I think he proved that with space. These are what are known as helix nebulas. There's one. There's another one. My personal favorite, if I hit the right button, that one. It's just beautiful. And that is light years and light years big. It's massive. I don't know the exact scale of that nebula, but I think we'd be safe to state that our solar system wouldn't even fit in our solar system. That's my second favorite space picture. I want to show you my favorite one. It's this one. You may think that we've seen much more beautiful and more grandeur pictures so far, but this one for me is special. It's known as the Pleiades. And in Job 38 and 31, God asked Job a question, and when I first heard this question in connection with this constellation of stars, I couldn't talk for a while. God says to Job, "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades?" God asked Job, "Can you hold the Pleiades in your hand, Job? Can you do that?" Because I can. And Job questioned God because of all the suffering that was going on in his life. He gave the impression through what he said that it's as if he didn't deserve it, and there's a lot of arrogance going on in what he said. And often what can happen in suffering is we can lose focus, and we can lose sight of how big God really is. It's often easy when we're suffering to give in to the temptation that, "Oh, woe is me. And this is so difficult. This is so hard to go through. God, why am I going through this suffering?" And we're very blessed that God said to Job, "You know the Pleiades, that far out group of stars that you can see in space, can you hold those in your hand?" And this was after God had already asked him a dozen or so questions. Can you measure the earth? How about space? Can you measure how big that is? Can you hold that in your hand? And though suffering is difficult, it's often good to look at it in perspective that the God who can hold the Pleiades in his hand, same God who can hold the entire universe in his hand, and he looks at the universe and he says, "Yeah, about that big." And even that is a poor comparison because the universe in comparison to the size of God is non-existent. It reminds me of what David says. In Psalm chapter 8, he says, "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants, you have established strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger." When David speaking about how majestic God's name is in all the earth, even when there are enemies of God who curse his name is still praised. As all of creation that he has created, the animals, the water, the land, the mountains, and space, all praise his glory. And David continues with one of my favorite verses. He says, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man, that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man, that you care for him?" When looking at all of what we went through, the scale of those stars, the scale of the Milky Way, the billions and hundreds of billions of stars and all these galaxies and hundreds of thousands of galaxies, and God formed them all in one day. All of it in one day. And he could have done it faster. And he holds all of it together. God sustains the universe, and without God's sustaining power in the universe, everything would plunge into chaos and disorder and would eventually just break off into oblivion. God has chained the Pleiades together so that they stay where they are, and God says, "You stay here," and they obey. And when looking at all of this, and we get to the question that David asked, what is man, that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man, that you care for him? With all these beauties of creation, is man really that significant? And yet God says, yes, man is that significant. So much so that Christ came not to die for the animals, not to die for the seas or the mountains, not to die for the stars in space. In fact, when we look at the story of Noah, God destroyed most of the earth. He destroyed the landscape, the greenery, the plants of the earth. But what did he save? He saved man. What did he save along with man? He saved animals. But his focus was not, let's say, save the animals. It's God. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. When Noah was on the ark, it wasn't God remembered the animals and Noah. It's God remembered Noah and caused the waters to decrease. There's something about man that God treasures enough that he would come and die for us. There's one last picture in space that I want to show you. This is known as the Hubble Cross. One of the deepest parts of space, when they pointed out the Hubble telescope, it came back with this picture. They don't quite know exactly what it is, and for a while, they named it the Hubble X. And I think after a lot of persuasion and criticism over that name, they changed it to the Hubble Cross. I don't know what that looks like to you, but that looks like an awfully lot like a cross to me. And it's amazing to me that God formed creation, and in this creation and in the deepest reaches of space, he plants an image of the cross. And when the scientists found it, as one Christian astronomer was joking around, he sees God just waiting, eager, waiting for people to find these things so he can say, look, here's more of my glory. Look, here's more of my glory. Look, here's what I did for you. I sent my son to die in your place so that you could have his righteousness. And God plants this image in space to be unknown for thousands and thousands of years until only recently we found this image. And it should cause us to humble ourselves. It should cause us to glorify God. The fact that the God who is majestic above all, the God that we read about in Genesis 1 as Elohim, this all-powerful God, is also the same God described in Genesis 2 as Elohim Yahweh, the Lord God. And God says to Moses, I have given you my name. It is Yahweh. Speaking of God's relationship that he desires to have with mankind. And right from creation, we see this relational aspect of God. And what should be our response to it? It should be the same response that we see David give in Psalm 19. As we read earlier, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. It should cause us to cry out in song and praises to God. So I'm going to pray to close, and Roger and Colleen will come up and lead us in a few songs where we can worship this magnificent and majestic God who is powerful enough to create everything that he did, all these wondrous things that we see in creation, but still loves us enough to die for us. Let's pray. Gracious Lord, thank you for who you are. Lord, you are a God who is all-powerful. Lord, and you loved us enough to die for us. Lord, that wasn't something that you had to do. It wasn't something that we deserved, that you should do it. But Lord, you did it because you wanted to. Out of the love of your heart towards us. And Lord, I pray that when we look upon the things of this world with creation, the things that you have created and the complexity that they are, that even the most simple organisms and plants that we see in this world are far beyond anything that we could ever create. Lord, that you created all of this space, and Lord, we won't even see all of it before you return. And yet, Lord, you created it to praise your name. So, Lord, I pray that, Lord, that would be our heart as well. As all of creation is in obedience to you because of the natural order you set, Lord, I pray that we as your people would be obedient to you and would long to be as well, to give you the praise and the glory for everything that you have done because of who you are. Pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
O Lord, my God.